Manliness is something many aspire to, but few achieve. Be warned, being manly isn't easy, nor should it be. Real men relish challenges. John Smith. He stood tall, squared shoulders, beaming at us behind thin, wire-rimmed glasses, wearing the straight button-down that has become standard fatigue for evangelical men all across the country. The first thing you have to do is recognize how you become dependent on things not from God, Smith said. We were learning Love in Action's program, a set of principles equating the sins of infidelity, bestiality, pedophilia, and homosexuality. Conversion therapy, sometimes known as reparative therapy, is a set of dangerous practices, often aiming to change one's gender identity expression and/or sexual orientation. Though it seems like a thing of the past, it's still being used to harm people to this day. Using the prose Boy Erased by Jared Conley, articles The Lies and Dangers of Conversion Therapy by the Human Rights Campaign, How to Be a Man and How to Be Manly from WikiHow, Born Perfect, The Truth About Conversion Therapy from the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and poems Homophobia and LGBT Rights by Brianna Edge and Mind Electric by Tally Hall in a program oral interpretation entitled, I'll Make a Man Out of You. A few hours later, I was sitting in the middle of Smith's circle. I was waiting for God to join me. Smith kept his arms crossed behind his back, his whole body tense as if he were tied to an invisible plank. Number 1, get fit. Manly men are aware of the image they project, so stand up straight and walk with purpose. Tell them what you did, T. We were in the group sharing portion of our afternoon session. T stood before our group to confess.
Father, Your Honor, may I explain? You see, my brain, it's claimed its glory over me, and I have a good heart, albeit...
He'd once again attempted suicide. Suicide isn't the answer, T said. The answer is God, plain and simple. We all said, I love you, T. It's a program requirement. When someone from the group stops talking, say I love you, blank. There is ample evidence that societal prejudice causes significant mental, psychological, and other harms to LGBTQ people. For example, research on the issue of family acceptance of LGBTQ youth conducted at San Francisco State University found that, compared with LGBTQ young people who are not rejected or only a little rejected by their parents and caregivers because of their gay or transgender identity, highly rejected LGBTQ young people were more than 8 times as likely to have attempted suicide. Smith turned to face us. Trauma is often linked to generational sin, he said. We have to understand where the sin came from in the first place, how it trickled down from father to son and mother to daughter. A blonde-haired boy handed us a stack of rubber band wrapped colored pencils. Members of our group slid from their chairs. I quickly followed. My knees were already accustomed because I spent hours kneeling at the altar of my family church, asking for God to change me.
Scattering sparks of fun energy, they would deliver me and carry me away, and they would say, here in my kingdom, I am your Lord, so I order you to cower and pray.
Our color-coded genealograms would tell us where everything had begun to go wrong. Trace our genealogy back far enough and we would find not the answer to our own sins, then at least what Liv had been responsible. Number 2, relish responsibility. Real men don't run from their challenges or shirk their obligations. Rather, they take pride being reliable and responsible. Now, what is a world without transition and change? Oh, the gays, lesbians, transgender, and bi people are not natural, they say. But who are they to say what's natural? It's important to recognize the deficiencies in your life. Danny Cosby was giving us a talk on the necessity of sports. He was telling us that a lack of sports in childhood could lead to effeminate behavior. Number 3, enjoy competition. You're not the only manly man in the world. Eventually you'll find yourself in competition with someone who's also confident, strong, and self-assured. But I was scared of Cosby. I was afraid he might be the one to be able to tell that I'd stop praying to God. In the past, some mental health professionals resorted to extreme measures, such as institutionalization, castration, and electroconvulsive shock therapy to try and stop people from being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, LGBT. The contemporary versions of conversion therapy are less shocking and extreme than some of those more frequently used in the past, but they are equally devoid of scientific validity and pose serious dangers to patients, especially to minors, who are often forced to undergo them by their parents or legal guardians, and are especially high risk of being harmed.
The nuns would commence incanting as the lightning strikes my temple thusly, and they would electrify my chambers to scorch out my sovereignty. And so, spiraling down, my majesty, I beg of thee, have some mercy on me. I'm just a boy, you see. I plead of thee. Have some sympathy for me.
Does God not love all his children? Is he not a forgiving God? Do you think that God could really turn his back on people because they fell in love? Is love not a strong thing to feel? This week has been tough, Smith said, carrying a metal folding chair to the center of the auditorium stage. He dusted his hands and he turned back to us. I think it's time you told us what was going on inside. He took my hand, led me to the metal chair. The silence was unbearable. I sat there for several minutes waiting for someone to end it. And then I stood up from my seat. I'm not angry, I said. And I wasn't gonna cry. At least I wasn't gonna let them make me cry. You know, you're crazy, I said. You're all completely crazy. And I took a step forward. I found I had enough strength to take a second one. I kept my eyes on the red exit sign, and each step gave me more and more strength until somehow, sprinting through the hallway, I came to a stop before the reception desk.
Number 4,
Be a family man. Your family should come first, before your career, and even before yourself. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the first ring. Mom, I said, I need your help. The humankind cannot be God, and they cannot decide who loves who. It is not their place, so why are they trying, and why are there so many debates? It is up to 2 people who fall in love. And love is such a beautiful thing. So why ruin it? My mother and I were quiet for most of the ride home. My mom pulled onto the highway and cars flew by us honking.
when it goes bright, the particles start to marvel, having made it through the night.
I dug my fingers into the cracks. My mother was quiet beside me, her breathing shallow. "Oh my God," she said. "Are you going to kill yourself?"
But never they ponder if eventually electric becomes calming, if you look at it right.
"Oh my God," she repeated. "We are stopping all of this now." She took that as the only evidence she needed to end my therapy sessions. I was alive. And now I had the benefit of knowing it. I was alive, and this is all that mattered.
Number 5, know yourself. Find out who you are and be happy with that person. There's no one way to be a man. A real man can be a logger who wears plaid and doesn't shower for 10 days. Or a real man can be a professor who knows all about Milton and Shakespeare. All men, however, know who they are, and they respect themselves inside and out.
I want to post this on a ladies' restroom, write it on the tag of women's underwear, write it in coupons to go into tan packages. Because my ex-husband will want to marry again, and there's no tattoo where he can't see to tell the next woman who might fall in love with him after 6 months, maybe a year, he will start with a slap. You can brush it off, but leave when he slaps you. When he begins to call you a whore and threatens to kill you each time you try to leave, it's almost like teasing, but it's not. Domestic Abuse, selections from Stories I Ain't Told Nobody Yet by Joe Carson, Beautiful Things from Trouble with You Is by Susan Jackson Rogers, and If I'm Missing or Dead by Jane Lawrence. Abuse, it happens everywhere, to the most unexpected people. Children, women, and men are all affected. The light does shine on certain relationships, but what about those left in darkness? The first time it happened, it was a surprise, but not really a surprise, like seeing a question in a dream, something you're supposed to know, but didn't. As soon as it happened, it was over. So the blur of his hand, the sharp sting on her face, fast reaching out, weeping, embracing her, all seemed like one fluid motion. He's a really good man, just under a lot of stress, that's all. The woman always said things like this, but in this case, she believed it was true. She was an artist, a college graduate. She was 26 years old. She was not the sort of husband who's hit her. Through the puffy well raising across her cheek suggested otherwise. Were there signs? She was a smart girl. Had she seen the signs? Some warning when they were dating. A push? A shove? Is it how the experts always say it starts? A bleeding comment, possessiveness, isolation from her friends. She shook her head, ice package on her cheek. She found the most amazing things coming out of her mouth. Just don't hit me in front of my children. Just don't hit my face. Just don't hit my stomach. You'll hurt the baby. She was not afraid of being hit, but of being left. If he left. She was pregnant now with a third child. What could she do? They had to stay together, at least until she figured something out. She was an artist. She wanted to make beautiful things, like the pots that she had made in her ceramics class. The ones who'd been thrown at her one afternoon while the baby snapped. The ones whose pieces she collected and put in a grocery bag under the stairs. A nice, dark place. She had hidden there once. When he had come home early and the children were at the neighbors, she had stayed there in the dark, knowing that he think that they have all gone out. She crouched in the darkness, breathing mouth balls and clay dust from broken pots. She was crying now, which she hadn't permitted herself to do very much. She could hear him on the other side of the door and knew what would happen if he found her. The first time I'd been in a fight over a computer she bought at a yard sale. She wanted it for Zach. It was a piece of crap, he said. It was outrated, 10 years old, new software wouldn't even run it on it. $25 down to the drain. Her dumb choice. She could see the hand draw back, then unbelievingly towards her, just to make things stop. And after that, there were other reasons. The messy house, the crying children, the money problems, unplanned pregnancies, the way she looked or didn't look. It was her foolish idea about selling her pots, her jewelry, her whatever it was this week. It used to be everyone else he was angry with. Now it was her. She didn't know when the shift had occurred. She wasn't there for that one. I cannot remember all the times he hit me. Could count the black eyes, how many times I said I ran into a door or fell down or stepped to any flying object except his fist. Once I got a black eye playing softball. The rest were him. His name is Michael. We joke and then whenever he passes by, he says hello. And then he invites me to sit on the terrace for lunch, and then other lunches, and then dinner, and then we're dating. At Thanksgiving, he takes me home to meet his parents. It's a nice, lovely suburban home with crystal, mahogany, and many, many rooms. I doubt they'll like me. Michael has warned me that they might not be happy that their boy's in love before he becomes a success. Still, just roll with it, he says. They'll love you once they get to know you. Michael's father is tall, deep voice, handshake strong, eye contact, steady. Michael's mother is slim, fashionable, her hair perfect, her eyes warm. In the dining room, he pulls out my chair and I sit and I spread my napkin across my lap. The turkey is in the platter, in front of the parchment, the potatoes in a silver bowl, and the salad in crystal. We bow our heads, that includes gratitude for our guest. We say amen and we raise our eyes. The father picks up the ironly-handed carving tools, serves us bounty, then he sets down the utensils. He plants his hand on either side of the table. Where the hell are the yams? I jerk back, then I look, there's no yams, no little sugar, no brown sugar. Damn it, he yells, you never do anything right. He picks up the turkey, hollers at decorative springs and all. It clears his wife's head and slides down the silk wallpaper. We are stunned to silence. After a beat, she jumps up and blushes, scoops the bird back onto the platter, and lifts, and tries to stand, and making a greasy print on the wall, as her husband storms into his study with his scotch. I can keep 2 sets of keys for yourself. Tell your children when you go. If he is throwing things, he is drinking, and if he is drunk enough, he cannot catch you. A punch to the chest hurts more than a punch to the jaw. A hit with an object does more damage than a hit with his fist. Unless he is drunk enough, he picks up the broom instead of the poker. If you pick up the poker, he will hit you with it. He will probably not kill you because you will pass out, and then all of a sudden, he's sorry, and it stops. I look at Michael. He will never get away with any of the sort. Sure, he shoved me once, and I tripped over a coffee table, and instead of helping me up, he followed and crammed my face onto the couch. And another time, we were out hiking, and he picked me up by the arm. If anyone had checked, left fingerprints. He had apologized, though, with tears in his eyes, both times. A month or so, Michael and I fly to Colorado for a ski vacation. Michael's using interest from his trust fund to pay for his trip. I'm so grateful, but also so angry at the inequalities of our realities. No matter what I say or do, he can't understand what it's like to look for money for rent, for heat. He thinks he does understand. You wouldn't understand, I say. You're being melodramatic. It's an argument that repeats itself endlessly. In the morning, we ski, and then later that night, we're in the room, dehydrated and growly. I wish I'd grown up taking things like this for granted. I say, I'm thinking about the cost tickets, the rental tickets, the lift tickets, the restaurant meals, and this room for this hotel. Immediately, I regret saying it. I sound like I'm whining or criticizing him somehow, calling him the poor little rich kid. He thinks I'm a snob because I don't recognize the things he has worked just as hard as I have for things in his life. He gets irritated when I insinuate otherwise. We have had this argument before. This time, though, he doesn't argue. Instead, he stares at me for a long moment, then reaches down, he puts his hand against my jaw, then slams me on the wall, then with a look like he's about to cry, he drives his fist into my ribs. The pain is explosive. Holding my stomach, after a while, I stand up, I catch my breath, and I slap him. He hits me, 1 and 2, in the ribs, I'm down, bleeding from the nose. He stares as I flinch backwards and I try to push him away. It hurts. I'm on the floor holding a pillow to my stomach as armor. I'm so sorry, he says. I'm so sorry. I love you so much. Why did you have to go and push my buttons? You know better. I can name what of me he broke. The ribs after I said divorce in spite of peace vow. I spent the night in the hospital. He did not even spend a night in jail. The sheriff I helped elect does not apply the law to family business. He always swore he never meant to do it. I do believe it was never planned. It was always just the day, or the way I looked at him afraid. Maybe the first time he didn't mean to do it. I say nothing and I'm breathing readily through my mouth. Eventually, I stand up and he helps me to bed. I sit there, flinching with every shift of weight. My nose screaming with each move. I touch my tongue to the corner of my mouth and tasted blood there. I can feel my lips swelling shut. My heart is pounding as I am with a flin, yet I can neither fight or flee. I am overdosing in my body's own drug and I can't move. I can't gasp out for a single plea of help. I slide my hand slowly up my body and press my fingertips in. This is going to leave a mark. I walk into the bathroom and look at myself in the mirror. My eyes are in purple and black from brown to cheekbone. I touch my nose. It is tender, but it doesn't bleed now unless I blow on it. I do not lift my shirt. I don't want to know more. I need a diagnosis and comfort and confidence. If I go to the hospital, people there will look at me and treat me forever as the battered woman. Whispers behind their hands that they don't want to be the one who suggests I deserve it. Or they say to each other or to themselves that they would have never let this happen, would have never given him the opportunity, and would have ran away and defended themselves. I know what they would think, though. They think that I've asked for it. Even the ones who think hitting is never justified will look at me and think, what did she do to deserve it? I will break up with him. I will call to him or write to him and tell him that it's over, that I want my clothes, my house, and my house key back. Or maybe I'll go over there while he's gone, pick up my stuff and leave a note. You only get to hit me once. I'll write. I nod my head and wait for the euphoria and relief. That's what I expect to feel. Instead, I get loneliness and fear that I will forever be the better woman, and he will return. When he says he will not hit you again as he drives you to the hospital, both of you in tears and you in pain, you have stayed too much long already. Tell the people in the hospital the truth, no matter how much you think you love him. Do not say you fell down the stairs, no matter how much he swears he loves you. He does love you. He loves you hurt, and he will hit you again. Thank you.
My girlfriend's favorite TV show is Friends. And after binging the 10 seasons of the famous show, a series of jokes stood out to me. Ross Geller's 3 divorces. After being married to a closeted lesbian, saying the wrong name at the altar, and a drunken night in Vegas, Ross may have deserved most of the jokes coming his way. However, for many Americans, divorce is no laughing matter. With hard feelings, split families, and broken hearts, many people believe that there's just nothing good about divorce. Enter, well, me. With my 4 parents having a combined total of 9 marriages, I've definitely seen my fair share of divorce, and thus the drawbacks that come with it. However, I've also been able to experience the positives that my family has received after my parents made the choice to split. And that is exactly why I'm standing in front of you here today. I'll be explaining to you the upsides to splitting up by first going over the negative history of divorce within America. Next, we'll look at how divorce has actually greatly benefited the American population. And finally, we'll give you some tips and tricks on how to have a healthy and happy divorce. But to begin, we must start out by looking at the history of divorce within America. So, unfortunately, no, we will not be taking a look at King Henry VIII of England and the creation of the Church of England. I'm sorry, I know it's a bummer. But in 1629, there was a breakthrough within divorce. The colony of Massachusetts Bay allowed the divorce under 4 faults through the legislative branch. To quote Dan Hurley, writing for the History Cooperative in 2015, this legislative branch was allowed to grant divorce on the basis of adultery, desertion, bigamy, and in many cases, impotence as well. If you are unaware of what impotence is, it is now commonly referred to as erectile dysfunction. The first obvious problem is the last fault given, impotence. And what was embarrassing for the men involved is all faults had to be proven in front of a court of people, which led to some, needless to say, uncomfortable situations for everyone involved. But the second problem with this list is what's not on it. Many kinds of abuse were not considered viable reasons for divorce, trapping people within abusive relationships. And according to the National Affairs, the powers of issuing divorce soon moved from the legislative branch to the judicial branch after some important people decided it was a good idea to focus on legislation for our new country instead of seeing if men could, Anyways, moving on. Again, to touch on the National Affairs article of 2009, none of these problems were ever truly touched on. That was until Ronald Reagan presented no-fault divorce in 1969. This revolutionized divorce within America and allowed Ross to continue his streak of being an absolutely hopeless romantic. But I haven't even answered that fateful question. What exactly are the upsides to splitting up? Almost everyone has heard the myth, 50% of all marriages end in divorce. But in the late 1970s, that statistic was almost fact. However, that has not been true within today's society, nor was it ever fully present within the 1970s. To quote James Hardy writing for the New York Times in 2015, although a quick increase led some to believe that the rate would keep rising, instead, we've actually seen the divorce rate begin to inch downward. What we can see with this data is that divorce wasn't this crazy epidemic like everyone was making it out to be. Instead, it was finally available to the people who truly needed it. And according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, many women needed it. In the following years of no-fault divorce being implemented, women's suicide dropped by 20%, showing that for many people, divorce was a real lifesaver. However, I know you may be thinking, what about the kids? But Scientific America in 2013 did a study on exactly that. Their study found that most kids dealt with the negative effects of their parents' divorce by the end of the second year of the divorce process. Additionally, most kids living within maritally tense households were actually relieved when the divorce was announced. But how exactly do you get this bounce back throughout your divorce process for you and your kids? Well, that is the final topic within our speech today. I'll be giving you some tips and tricks on how to have a healthy and a happy divorce. But to begin, I must preface that both these points come from, and these tips and tricks both come from the National Healthline and Psychology Today, mixed in with my own personal opinion. But with that little PSA out of the way, how to have a healthy and happy divorce in 3 simple steps, presented by none other than WikiHow. The first step is what you should put first, the kids. Almost everyone can agree that the kids are the most important part of any divorce process. However, don't agonize over how the break will affect them. Instead, work on a custody plan that works for both parties as well as the kids involved. And never use the kids to your own personal advantage. This means talking badly about your ex in front of them, forcing them to choose sides, and intentionally putting them in the middle. The second tip I have for you is how to handle situations within the courtroom. Once you step foot inside of a courtroom, leave all your personal issues and feelings aside. Now is not a time for bickering. Instead, it is a time for agreement and progress, not disagreements. And always use mediators when necessary. But how can you do any of this if you don't finally focus on yourself? Self-care is vital to any divorce process, and it includes a positive lifestyle of food and exercise, surrounding yourself with positive friends and family members, and doing something as simple as never forgetting to laugh or smile. The negative effects of divorce won't last forever, so don't let them negatively affect the rest of your life. And like I said at the beginning of the speech, I, like Ross's son Ben, am a child of divorce. Thankfully, without the intense alcohol consumption and the wrong names at the altar. And look, I turned out just fine. Okay, bad example, but at the end of the day, while my parents' divorces did have a negative effect on me for the short term, I wouldn't be the person who I am today without that decision. My final piece of advice to you is this. If you ever find yourself in the divorce process or are currently going through it, whether as a child or one of the parties involved, you are so much stronger than you may think. The negative effects of divorce don't last forever, so don't let them negatively affect you. And eventually you'll begin to see the other side. More specifically, those upsides. Thank you.
A long time ago, the world was dealing with a similar tragedy that we're dealing with today, in the form of smallpox. It was highly deadly and highly contagious, meaning that everyone was rushing to find a vaccine for it. The Chinese came out with a vaccine that they were trial running on different people, but it wasn't quite sure what it did yet. On the other hand, a man named Edward Jenner, over here, made an observation on milkmaids and how they weren't exactly catching the smallpox virus. He developed a vaccine from that observation, but he had no one to test it on. He himself had been trial running the Chinese vaccine. So he did what any level-headed scientist would do with an untested vaccine he needed to test. He gave it to his 8-year-old child, named James. James, thankfully, survived and proved that the vaccine worked, meaning it was administered across the world, and people had a vaccine to get over smallpox, which was eventually eradicated. However, what if that scenario turned out a little bit different? What if James had a lifelong side effect or even died from the side effects of a vaccine that no one knew what it did? Now, that is a situation we could find ourselves in from COVID-19, where everyone's rushing to find a vaccine and skipping all sorts of methods and trials and criteria that need to be met in order to make sure a vaccine is safe and viable. But also, we need to make sure that we're doing all we can to fight coronavirus. So when my coach asked me if a coronavirus vaccine was found, should we make all students take it in order to attend public school? My answer was yes, because we need to protect everyone. But it has to be based on 3 very concise conditions. First, being that it has to be approved by WHO and the FDA. 2, that it has to be accessible to all students. And thirdly, that we sparsely give out exemptions based on religious reasons. So first, let's talk about the approval needed from the FDA and WHO. The FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, is an administration that is responsible for putting a stamp of approval on anything we put in our bodies, from food to pharmaceuticals. If it doesn't have an FDA stamp on it, you probably should not be eating it or taking it. So having the FDA put all of their criteria and standards into evaluating a new vaccine will make sure that it's safe and has a stamp of approval many Americans trust. Putting WHO, or the World Health Organization, behind that as well will give a global standpoint to make sure that the vaccine is also tried and true, so that we can give it to the most vulnerable population in our society, the children. The reason we need these checks is because of how everyone is rushing to find a vaccine. According to Business Insider on April 1st, 2020, Dr. Fauci said that we can have a vaccine found within 18 to 20 months. But the sketchiest part of this is that in that very same article, other experts say he was being way too optimistic. That vaccines take a minimum of 2 years to be tested, tried, and true, and even evaluated as safe, while the most perfected vaccines have taken 15 to 20 years to develop. We need to make sure that what we're giving to the children isn't going to make their life worse than it already is, and that could certainly happen if we're not careful. So making sure that WHO and FDA give their stamps of approval to a new vaccine is absolutely essential. For my second point about making vaccines accessible. Vaccines and even someone's life shouldn't depend on how much money they have or where they live. So if schools are making a requirement in order for students to be vaccinated in order to even attend school, then they have to make sure that all students can access the vaccine that they're being required to get. There is a new bill, according to a CNN article from earlier this month, called HR 6666. It's setting aside $100 million for schools across the nation to apply, as long as they're providing corona-related resources. The article itself says that it is not dealing with COVID-19 vaccines. However, if there was a vaccine that is approved and available, the resources can be used to fund those for the students in the community, meaning that they can draw from this grant and they can provide vaccines to kids who need it in lower income communities or kids who just can't afford to go all the way to the clinic or things like that. Making sure that all students have access to the vaccine is essential if you're saying that they have to have a vaccine, because otherwise you could be denying a student their education based on how much money they have or where they live, or any of those factors that they cannot control. But the last and most important condition that we have to consider is to make sure that we're not just handing out free exemptions for whatever people say. There is a new bill, according to BillTracker50.com, in New Jersey, where they make sure that any vaccine exemption given is given on the basis of a religious right. And that religious right has to be proved by a document, it has to be proved by a religious institution and their stamp of approval. But it cannot be given, and this is stated directly in the bill, it cannot be given for philosophical, moral, or political beliefs. Meaning, anti-vaxxers, checkmate, pretty much. And so anybody who says they can't have a vaccine or they won't have a vaccine have to prove it through that document, which means we still allow for the freedom of religion, but we still also compensate for the tragedy of the commons and make sure that everyone who can get vaccinated will get vaccinated so that we can eradicate the disease in the end. That is absolutely essential because of the tragedy of the commons. A term we find in economics that says that if a community resource is available, it's going to be depleted before everyone can use it. So the basic analogy is that there's a pond of fish, and there's a whole bunch of fish in the pond, enough for everybody, and everyone comes in and they fish 1 or 2 fish a day. Then fish will reproduce and the resource will be fine. But if one person decides to overfish, then that resource is gone for everybody. And if one person decides that they want to overfish before someone else is overfished so that they can feed their family, then that person's going to overfish before they do, and eventually there's no fish for anybody, because you cannot trust people to treat a community resource as they would their own resource. The same concept applies to immunity. Now, herd immunity is something we've all heard in the media, where if enough people are vaccinated, then the disease is completely eradicated. But if you just hand out exemptions to people who believe that it's going to give their children autism, for example, which is completely disproven, then you're going to find that everyone's having an exemption, which means no one's vaccinated, which means the disease is not vaccinated, or we're not reaching that number of people being vaccinated in order to eradicate the disease. So making sure that we're not just handing out exemptions and having strict codes for what an exemption needs is essential to actually making the requirement feasible and eradicating disease in general. In conclusion, when asked the question if children should be required to have a vaccine before coming back to public school, my answer is yes, but only based on the 3 conditions outlined in my speech today. First, that it is approved by the World Health Organization and FDA. Secondly, that it is accessible to all students no matter what their income level or their home situation is. And thirdly, that exemptions are only made on a proven religious right. If this is what happens, then we're going to see, 1, a deadly disease being eradicated for the long run, and 2, our children are still safe after that. Because in the case of little James Jenner, that could have turned out way worse. And we can do better with COVID-19. If there's anything this social distancing has proved, if there's anything that this social distancing has proved, is that we can defeat COVID-19 if we do it together. Thank you.
Please slow down a little.
Columbia School of Medicine Encyclopedia of Health. What the book had to say was sandwiched between stroke and epilepsy. This was the entry's first paragraph, sometimes called shaky palsy, usually begins between the ages of 50 and 65, but it is usually a shaky tremor of the hands that brings a patient to a physician. Back to that first sentence, 50 and 65. This was my escape clause I'd clung to like a life raft, my only hope for salvation. You see, it was, like the doctor said, very unlikely a fellow my age could get it. But at the Mount Sinai Hospital, as I finished up my finger taps and nose touches, I knew I failed miserably. So it came as no surprise when the doctor sat me down and he said, "I'm very sorry, but it's clear to me that you do, in fact, have young onset Parkinson's disease." Michael J. Fox and I have more in common than you may think, including being devilishly handsome, always wanting to own a dream car of a DeLorean, and experiencing the side effects of Parkinson's disease. My experience started when my late uncle was diagnosed with the disease and has continued as my grandfather was diagnosed this past summer. However, these men continue to inspire me every day because no matter the trials or tribulations that life may throw at them, they all consider themselves a lucky man. By Michael J. Fox. As far back as I can remember, even as a kid, I'd always lacked the faith required to sit still. I can remember that first morning, the Pinky Rebellion. It was a Tuesday morning, so while I don't remember the exact details of the previous night's debauchery, it was a pretty safe bet that it had something to do with Monday Night Football. But even with the lights off, the blinds down, and the drapes pulled, an offensive amount of light still filtered into my room. I covered my face in a weak attempt to block the glare, and that's when I noticed my pinky. It was trembling. And I was even more surprised to discover that I couldn't stop it. I began to wander from room to room as if a solution might appear around the next corner. I had pinched it and pulled it, and I had curled it up to a fist and pressed it against my chest, and even pinned it to the desk with the Gideon's Bible, but eventually the result was always the same. That morning, my brain had initiated a divorce from my mind. Efforts to reconcile would be futile. 80% of the process, I'd later learn, was already complete. But with my diagnosis came another shift. My relationship with alcohol. I was miserable. Every night after work, I'd have a couple beers as I went into my trailer, and then I'd have a couple more as the Teamster drove me home, and for all my sneakiness, I knew I couldn't be hiding my drinking all that well, because around the time that dinner began, my voice would be inappropriately loud and my words slurred. Sometimes I would even have a drink or two after Tracy had gone to bed. But on the 26th of June, it happened that Tracy and I were leaving for work around the same time, she to the theater and me to the set, and I had been told to work around 5 a.m. and advised Tracy that she probably wouldn't see me until the following morning. But what was interesting is when I got there, it seemed to be a scheduling mistake. I wouldn't have to work from 5 like I previously figured. Instead, I'd be done from 9:30 to 10 p.m. and home before Tracy. In my mind, it was prime drinking time. I don't remember being driven home, only sneaking in sometime around 5 to 6 a.m. and passing out on the couch with my feet propped up against the upholstered arm. And I just heard, "Daddy, Daddy, wake up, it's time to go to Connecticut." Sam, my 3-year-old son, my baby boy, was in this moment nothing more than a gnat buzzing in my ear, irritating me into consciousness, and I wanted to swat at him or push him off me onto the floor, and then I saw feet. They were Tracy's feet, and the feet had on shoes, and she was heading to the Saturday morning's matinee. And when I finally gained the courage to look her in the eye, I saw no sign of rage. Instead, it was something far more disturbing. She seemed bored. All right, okay, hold on. All right, so listen, sweetheart. Listen, last night was. She had walked towards the door, and she turned back and she looked at me and said, "Is this what you want to be? This is what you want to be?" And then she was out the door. I'd always thought of alcohol as an ally in my struggle against Parkinson's, but as I lay on that couch that morning with my son crawling all over me, I knew this couldn't be the case. I can't do anything about my Parkinson's, but alcohol is different. Here, I at least had a choice, and I made it. And you would think that this decision would lead to an inspiring upward arc, but the truth is more complicated. There would eventually become a well-defined turning point called Christmas Eve. Everyone else was asleep, and I was making a list. I soon found myself, pen in hand, hunched over a loose collection of scrap paper. For Tracy, I wrote, does she still love me? And if that's true, how is that possible? And over again, I professed my love for her, and that one day I hoped that she could possibly forgive me. And for Sam, I apologized because I realized I put a lot of pressure on a 4-year-old to deal with me and the things that I was going through in ways that most adults I knew had no idea how to handle. And I don't know if I just tired of writing or my hands cramped or I just didn't have the strength to go on. I looked over what I'd written and I'd wept. Whatever this was, I realized it was an instrument of my own surrender. And that next day, I found the phone number that Tracy had written down for me days before, the one that belonged to a shrink in Manhattan. I didn't suddenly burst out of my cocoon of fear, nor was in a linear progression, an easily followed map of self-discovery. Instead, as Tracy put it all came down to showing up for my life. Just doing the work. Next spring, it was 6 a.m. I sat up in bed, careful not to wake Tracy, and I focused on my hand. After time, it started trembling, and it was just like the beginning. Just like before. Except for one key difference. This wasn't the left hand that I was looking at. This is my right hand. The tremor had moved to the right side of my body, and I wasn't surprised. I have Parkinson's disease. It's an inevitability. That morning I did what I'd done every day since the day I'd stopped drinking. I looked up and said, God, please grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can. And the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you.
Oh, you want to know, do you? Well, I'm angry about a lot of things. I'm angry because I put too much starch in my kilt and I cannot wear it without scraping my knees on the scratchy tartan colours. I'm angry because all my sheep think it's a lark to push themselves all together into one woolly behemoth and befuddle me into thinking they're one massive super sheep. Oh, let's all gang up on the shepherd day. Good times for sheepies. Have you ever lost something that was valuable to you? Has it ever made you feel like your whole world was crashing down? Do you ever wonder how you're going to entertain your sheep? Wait, what? Dirk the Angry Scotsman by John C. Havens. Oh, I'm angry because everyone and their sister wants one of these new pashmina scarves made from only one type of sheep or lamb. And now my flock has a Class A struggle between the pashmina sheeps and the non-pashmina sheeps. And let me tell you, there's nothing more daft than a sheep with an attitude. And now they're all clamoring on me to get the designer Calvin Klein shepherd's cook. And they want me killed to match it. I mean, can you imagine? Livestock concerned with accessorizing.
Oh, Dirkie, we just cannot graze all day with these split hooves. It is just so bad for my nerves. And jittery sheep make for lesser quality wools, that's all I'm saying.
Bah. I'm also angry because of all the lasses I used to date saying, "Oh, I love you, Durkee, I truly do. You're so special to me. And if it weren't for me boyfriend, we'd be together." Well, thanks for nothing, you convoluted harpy. If it weren't for me boyfriend, we'd be together. And it's like saying Fuzzy Bear would be president if it weren't for the fact that he's a muppet. It's just not gonna happen. So hit the road, Jackie, and don't come back. But most of all, I'm angry because my bagpipes were stolen. And not that I could play all that well, mind you, but I almost had the beer barrel polka down to a T. You know, my voice just doesn't sound the same without my pipes. Here, take a listen. We are the world. We are the children. We make it a better day. So let's eat the chicken. See how scrambled my brains are without me pipes? I sound more altered than Michael Jackson after his 5th cosmetic surgery. I left my pipes unlocked in the shed by my house. And oh, I know what you're thinking, ya poor jaded citizenry of mottled urban society. Well, what do you expect, kilt boy? You left your little pipes unlocked in your shed. You deserve to have them stolen. You made a mistake, so just do as Oprah says and forget about it. Well, thanks for nothing, Brooklyn Bobby. I can't just forget about it. They were mine, don't you see? I'm the victim here. I'm thinking of starting my own support group. I'll call it SAPS. Scotsmen Against Pipe Snatching. Oh, I should probably think of a better name is all. Anyways, now me Anna is missing. And no, she's not the lass I was talking about earlier. Anna's me pipes. Me bagpipes. And let me remind you, bagpipes aren't rare in the land of the Scots. They're about as plentiful as shepherd's pie or colourful accents. But she was mine, don't you see? I had my sweat on her tartan, my saliva on her reeds. My heart went through that instrument with every wrong note that I played. But sometimes, when the sun was setting and I got my breathing just right, I could make Amazing Grace sound so good that it would make Saint Peter take his hands off his ears. Losing something that dear to me made me realize something. When you lose something you had a shared experience with, it's not like losing a TV or a lot of money. You lose a bit of your heart, a bit of your soul. Anna's theft has made me realize that there are people that I don't want to lose. It may seem that I'm a bit of a loner, being a shepherd and all, but it's not true. I need my friends, the ones who truly care about me. And Anna wasn't true flesh and blood like you. And I need you, my sweet love. I know how patient you are with me when I'm out in the fields all day working and I come home at night all tuckered and spent. And I know how well you tend to our home and take care of the nippers. And I know how smart and talented you are and how you could have chosen any man in our village for your husband and mate. But you chose me. And let me tell you, that is the most dear and precious part of this cranky shepherd's life. And I'm wanting to let you know this before anything may break us apart. You're the most dear and precious part of my life, and I never want to lose you. You're not a set of bagpipes that I can control. You're your own independent individual, and that's one of the reasons that I cherish you so. And I want you to know how much I truly love you. And I want you to know this so you can do with this information what you will. I'm letting you know it so you can wear it like a locket around your neck and never want to lose you. You're just so important to me. I'm sorry, sweetie. I'm getting the VP cries. I feel like I've watched Terms of Endearment 2 times in a row. Can I get the tissue? Okay, I'm done. I'm sorry. Now, to prove to you what I'd say is true and that I truly love you, I would play you a song on Anna. But she's gone. So I can play you second best. I can play you the pan flute. I mean, it makes sense for a shepherd, eh? All right, here we go. Come and stay at that. What? Spell the letter, sheepies. He said, why? They didn't. Oh, you daft woolly egots. What was that? No, you can't go to the sheepy spot. Spell out the letters. I hate you. Thank you.